Hello everyone, and we will be discussing the continuation of this first module, and we have learned in the previous lesson the difference between the psychological test and psychological assessment. Now in this session, we will further discuss the other tools involved with psychological assessment. Let us first proceed with psychological testing. So psychological testing is a set of procedure designed to measure a person's personality, intelligence, neuropsychological aspect of the human um, faculty, and of course, um, compared with medical tests, okay, a psychological test will help the assessment to analyze the sample of that person's behavior, just like in blood testing and other testing, okay? But in psychological testing, it may be generally involve tasks such as pencil and paper questionnaire, and sometimes it may involve computerized testing. Okay, maybe it may involve some verbal responses to specific questions and the performance of a specific task, such as we do with neuropsychological testing. So generally, there is no universal procedure on how psychological tests be conducted. So most likely, these tests have their own standardized administration, okay, and procedures which are specified in their test manual. The same goes with scoring and interpretation of gathered data, or how test users be able to make sense on these scores from the test takers. Of course, some tests may include right or wrong responses, and some might be using a Likert scale, just like in personality inventories, to identify the test taker's agreement with a specific item. Okay, so if you have the copy of this presentation, you may click this picture right here, and it may lead you to the list of psychological tests, be it in personalities, neuropsychological, and intelligence test. Okay, so the list is characterized with a list of names as well as the categories that they have. Okay, so aside from the psychological test, a psychologist may also conduct an interview as part of the assessment. Okay. Now, compared with psychological testing, when we conduct interview as part of the assessment, we may encounter some of observations, be it verbal and non-verbal characteristics of the person involved during the interview. So we may take note of the body language as well as the verbal and non-verbal manifestation during the interview. Now, during this session, you may observe some aspects such as the facial expressions, okay, some mannerisms of the person, and these factors cannot be easily determined in self-report inventories or tests. There are times in the field of human resources that a practitioner may conduct a panel interview. This is in contrast with face-to-face interview or one-on-one interview. Okay, now in panel interview, more than one interviewer participate with a personal assessment. Okay, so this type of assessment may establish inter-rater reliability when it comes to assessment of this subject or applicant when assessing a candidate for the said position. Okay, based on given scores and assessment, the subject matter experts may conduct assessment of these observations that they have observed during the interview. So you may also experience this during thesis defense, job interviews, and many other settings which may require multiple evaluators. Okay, so we have discussed testing and interview. Now we will discuss okay the another set or tool for assessment. We have the portfolio. Portfolio is a tool for assessment as well. So during a job interview, for example, in IO psychology or human resource function, the interviewer might ask you, as the applicant, for example, for your achievements, your products, and other materials that you had accomplished in the past. Now, let us say, for example, you are applying as a psychometrician for a company which is specializing for educational measurement, for example. They might be interested in what you will be presenting to them in by means of your previous accomplishments such as your projects and your freelance work as a independent psychometrician, for example, or independent researcher, for example, and then how you construct a psychometric test, or how you conduct data analysis or samples of your psychological report and the like. Okay, so these materials can be included in your portfolio, which will be assessed by the interviewer. In another field of expertise, for example, we have artists which may show their output, such as their film, their videos, or some other materials which are in line with their target job position. So, for example, another example is in the IT or information technology industry. For example, a software developer or a web developer might be also sharing his sample work, such as a designed web page, a program, or probably which he developed as his thesis during the undergraduate program. Okay, so this may be included in the portfolio, or a project which he accomplished in one of his course. Now, this is also true with teacher applicants. Okay, so teacher applicants might show their sample outcomes-based teaching learning plan, or some visual aids and sample modules which they prepared in the past. So generally, the portfolio is a tool which you can present to be part of the assessment. Okay. Now, after portfolio, okay, so this is an example of a portfolio. After portfolio, we can also consider case history data. Now, case history data are most likely obvious or most likely apparent in medical field. Okay, in terms of assessment, it is commonly used in the medical assessment. For instance, a client being referred due to a specific issue can be assessed from medical history, the test and other assessment being conducted in the past, which could be used as methods to see what are the previous case of this client. Okay, now all the tests being conducted as well as the interviews from the immediate family can be seen as evidences for the person's current functioning and symptoms. So aside from the clinical setting, this can also be used in order to track students' behavioral standing or behavioral problem, for example, or in a workplace setting, case history data, okay, will help the human resource services to identify the background of a person who might be exhibiting series of behavioral problems. So aside from the case history data that we have right here, we also have behavioral observation. Now, behavioral observation is very important when it comes to some instances where studies cannot be done in a manner of not being intrusive into a person's life. Okay, so for example, we use behavioral observation as we can also relate this as also a naturalistic um, observation. Now, what we do with naturalistic observation, we can use this for some economic reasons. For example, a business consultant may conduct behavioral observation among the target clients of the business instead of observing them in a confined room or experimental room. So, or some researchers might conduct a behavioral observations among target subjects without being intrusive to personal space of their target respondents. All right. And this may also be used by psychologists who may want to explore a qualitative characteristics of a personality disorder that might be occurring in a person. So the researcher or psychologist may resort into this kind of tool or methodology to gather as much information as possible without intervening really with the natural setting of the target person. Okay. Now we also have role play test. Now role play assessment can be used in terms of evaluating individuals in a corporate setting, for example, or military context, in terms of finding a managerial or leadership ability. Now these individuals may be tasked to, for example, mediate a hypothetical dispute between personnel at work site or any other role play which may include real life task situations. Of course, role play is evaluated eventually with a rating scale based on the constructs or characteristics which we try to measure. The scale may include the amount of time spent to resolve the issue, for example, or we may also include a technique being used by the participant and other constructs which we may include. So basically, role play can also be used among clinical interns. For example, they will be tasked to have a role or play role play of either being a clinician practitioner or being a patient. Okay, so the role play may include some of enactment of symptoms that the target case is being portrayed or the interventions that might be considered to address the case. Okay, so goes with this context. There will be a assessment with the tools and techniques being used during the role play. Okay, so it may we may also assess the time spent to resolve the issue and the knowledge being executed during the role play about the intervention and several constructs being measured. And we also have computers as tools. Now, we may be familiar with the term computer assisted psychological assessment, or what we call CAPA. Now, this procedure typically assists the test user. Okay, for example, it can be used to have either local processing or central processing of the test gathered data from the test being conducted, or by teleprocessing, or what we call the, communicating the results through okay, teleprocessing. And then these mechanisms assist the test user to interpret the gathered data more efficiently. In some cases, reports may generate interpretive reports, and sometimes we may consider consultative reports, and most likely in some advanced forms of this type of reports, we may also consider integrative report. Okay, so that depends on the design and development of these computer-assisted psychological assessment or CAPA. Now, on the other hand, we may also encounter the term computer adaptive testing. Now, computer adaptive testing or CAT tends to assess the test-taking pattern of a person. So you may also encounter this kind of test during an intelligence testing with the use of computer, where you might encounter a computer program test, um, which is designed to program or switch from testing, for example, your math skills and then to English skills after 3 consecutive failures, for example, on your math examination, or after 2 consecutive failure to answer difficult items correctly, okay, or incorrectly, the test might redirect you to more easier items. So you may encounter this type of assessment in industry. Okay. Now, now that we are done with several assessment tools, let us now discuss the different parties on assessment or individuals who are involved with psychological assessment. First, we have the test developer. Basically, test developers are those individuals who develop and design the test. Okay. Next is the test user. Now, test users, this may range from the psychologists, professionals, and psychometricians, other clinicians, counselors, human resource personnel, and the like. Okay, simply they are the ones who administer the test. However, there are certain standards and ethical guidelines on who will be using of what type of test. So there are 3 levels of test. We have level A test, level B test, and level C test. Basically, level A test can be conducted by a non-psychological psychology practitioner who can administer and score and interpret the test with the aid of manual and general orientation to kind of organization. So this may include school principals and business executives. Now, level 8 tests include your trade and vocational proficiency test. Okay, so most interest inventories and group or individual and multiple choice tests that employ simple metric. So as the main avenue of interpretation, such as your occupational clusters, okay? And we also have the level B test. Now, level B test includes the tests which require a specific training for administration and scoring and interpretation. So unlike level A, which not necessarily need training, okay, and so you can use level A with just your test manual. Level B has to be conducted with by a person with specified training in terms of administration, scoring, and interpretation of the test. Now, these tests are more complex, okay, compared with level A. So, the test user will have the understanding with the psychometric principles, such as the traits being measured and discipline within which the tests are used, such as education, clinical, and counseling. Okay, so basically, level B test would generally include most individual or group tests of achievement interest, screening inventories, and personnel tests. Okay, so This one, at a minimum, the user must have adequate training with reliability, validity, and test construction of this test, and supervised experience in administration and scoring and interpretation of such tests. For some tests, the test publishers may include other qualifications such as your master's degree in psychology or education, or sometimes equivalent training in terms of assessment. Okay, and lastly, we have level C. Okay, when we say level C, it is the most restricted category compared with level A and level B. So it is a need of specialized training with test. Okay, so basically it requires training and experience in administration, scoring, and interpretation. So this may require a master's degree, a doctorate program, and sometimes it may require your professional license. So okay, also it may require verification of relevant area of assessment consistent with some standards which will be required by the corporation being okay, used during the testing. And now we also use this level C test depending on standards and academic requirements being used. Okay, so number one, you have to know the theoretical constructs of this instrument, and number two, you have been knowledgeable with the training, okay, and administration and scoring interpretation of the test, and we also have the psychometric principles of the test, and lastly, supervision and administration, scoring, interpretation of the instrument. Okay. Now, the test taker are basically those individuals who will take the test or who are subject of an assessment or an evaluation can be a test taker or what we call an assessee. We also have various organizations, companies, and government agencies sponsor the development of the test for various reasons. For example, you will be employed in a company for human resource services. They might be requiring you to conduct a test construction of psychometric test. So they may be requiring you to create an intelligence test or screening test for their clients. So this might be possible when you are in the industry already. Okay. So in some cases, these companies and services are simply extensions of test publishers, and in other cases, they are likely independent. Okay, now let us talk about with the different settings of testing. So we have mentioned in the previous lesson about the educational setting, clinical setting, industrial and organizational setting, and government setting. Now, school setting may conduct several tests, okay, such as ability test and test for special needs. So this may also include some other tests such as achievement test, which tends to evaluate the children's the children accomplishment and their degree of learning. Okay, some of the achievement tests you may encounter in school were constructed by teachers, so they are teacher-made tests. So other achievement tests were constructed widespread used by educators working with measurement professionals. Okay, it's morning. Now, the test employed in clinical settings is also possible, all right? So this may include the intelligence test, personality test, neuropsychological test, all right? The other specialized instruments, okay? Depending on the presenting and suspected problem area. Okay, so the basic important factor that we might consider in a clinical setting is to answer really the the okay to answer the referral question. Okay, so this may include individual testing and group testing. So aside from clinical and school settings, we also have counseling setting. Now, counseling setting is more focused on measures of social and academic skills and measures of your personality, your interests, attitudes, as well as your values are among many types of tests that a counselor might consider or administer to a client. So referral questions might include how can this client or child be better focused on certain task inside the school to for what career is this a client is best suited. So basically, they are more likely inclined with certain characteristics of individuals who are into some activities and are being recommended to certain activities. Okay, now we also have business and military settings. So business and military settings may include, okay, uh, several use of achievement, aptitude, interest, as well as motivation and other tests involving employment and decision to hire individuals, okay, related to decisions regarding promotions, transfer of job, satisfaction and eligibility for further training. So using tests, interviews, and other tools of assessment, a psychologist who specialize in business, marketing, and sales of products may involve taking pulse of the consumers or target market. So they help corporations as well as the business to predict the public's receptivity to a new product. Okay, so a new brand or advertising or marketing campaign. So they try to diagnose, okay, the needs of the existing market and older brands and products and identify how they might be revitalized and made more appealing in the eyes of the consumer. And also the governmental and organizational credentialing. Now, one of many applications of measurement in government is licensure examination. For instance, in Board of Psychology, we are requiring to have licensure exam for psychometricians and psychologists. So before they are legally entitled to general practice of medicine, for instance, those now are physicians, okay, must pass the examination. The same goes with other professions, the teachers, okay. So law school, for example, graduates cannot present themselves to public as attorneys if they do not pass the bar examination. So psychologists as well. Okay. Now, during the test administration, now let's proceed with the how. So we are done with the who. Now we are now proceeding with how are the tests being administered. Now, especially in one-on-one interview or small group testing, rapport is very important between the examiner and the examinee. So it is very important. So in this context, rapport may be defined as a working relationship between the two parties. Okay, so with few words, small talk, and when the examiner and examiner are being introduced, so it is being built. Okay, after a test administration, the test user may have this obligation to communicate how will be the interpretation of this will be done, or how or depending on the protocols of this test administration. Okay, so in addition, there are other obligations such as those related to test scoring. Okay, if a test is to be scored by people, then scorers need to be in agreement about scoring criteria. So he or she must follow the scoring criteria. Okay, so the same goes with interpreting the test results and seeing to it that the test data or test data are used in accordance with established procedures and ethical guidelines, being constituted further obligations of the test user. Assessment of people with disabilities is also important. Okay, so those individuals who have disabilities are assessed exactly the same reasons that people with no disabilities are assessed. Of course, to obtain employment, for instance, to earn a professional credential, okay, and of course to be screened for psychopathology and so forth. Now, in the Philippines, there are some ethical guidelines, laws being reinforced or enacted to cover this kind of practice. So, okay, so in ethical guidelines of psychology, there might be considerations in terms of assessment with those individuals who are with disabilities. Now, because we want to accommodate those individuals who have needs to be assessed, now there are various researchers who consider to create alternate assessments. How is that? Alternate assessments is an evaluative or a diagnostic procedure or process which may differ from the usual, or it is being customary or being standardized way of measurement. So it is derived either by virtue of some special accommodation of an individual who might be in need of this assessment, or by means of alternative methods. For example, a test taker who has a difficulty reading, we might consider um, other assessment tools which may also almost equivalent with the test which may be being used with normal individuals or normal functioning individuals. Okay, so in most cases, because alternate procedures have been individually tailored, there is seldom compelling research to support equivalence. So in the near future, if you would be into creating assessment tools for those individuals who have disabilities, they might as well might consider this approach of research in the near future. And finally, let us talk about the reference sources that we may consider. So we are going to find those resources for these test materials that we have. So we have test catalogs. So test catalogs are detailed information concerning the development of a particular test and some technical information relating to it. So it should be found in the test manual as well. So which is usually available uh, from the test publisher. Now we also have reference volumes. For instance, we have the Buros Institute of Mental Measurements, and we also have mental measurements yearbook. You can actually search this on Google, and you will find these materials to be helpful in terms of knowing these information about list of tests, including test publisher, the test authors, the test purposes, and intended test population and test administration time. And lastly, we have journal articles. So journal articles may contain reviews of the test. So it is updated independent studies. So they are scientifically based studies, and with psychometric soundness. Okay, so they conduct several studies. For example, how instruments was used in either research or applied context. For example, we may use the NeoPI-R and how it is being used in clinical setting or how it's being used with surgical setting, clinical setting, and industrial organizational setting. So there might be some variations of results in terms of how we use this kind of test. All right. Okay. So we also have online databases. Now, online databases will help you to really explore more about several tools available online. Okay, so you may search for these tools, online databases, which may help you in the long run. Okay, so I think this concludes our discussion. If you have this copy of the presentation, you might click this text right here, and it will lead you to this list of psychological tests available and assessments for psychological assessments. Okay, so here are the references that we have. So you might as well consider the following references for your readings. Okay, so this concludes our discussion for this day of overview of psychological testing and assessment, and I will see you in the next topic.